Voodoo child, baby.
Reincarnated.
I'm a voodoo child.
That's awesome. That is some good music, dude.
Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Totally.
Too bad we don't have Mark on, because this was his song, right? We did it for him.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick, good to have you back on, dude. Long time no see. Show us the cup again.
Yeah, let's zoom in on that cup.
Ronnie. Yeah.
Tear down that wall.
Bring her back.
Yep. That's right. So, hey, Stephanie, do you wanna welcome our listeners into this episode, or?
Yes. So we are kicking off this session, and we are diving into digital twin technology. What's it good for? How do we apply it? Why would we even need digital twin technology? And what's the technology behind it? And how does it impact the IoT space? So also don't forget to follow us on IoT Coffee Talk.
Yes,
we need you guys to follow all of our 30 sessions now.
Yeah, this is episode, I think, 29 or 30. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, and I think in this episode, we really want to focus on best practices, right? Because, I mean, one of the things, Rick, you and I kind of went back and forth on is, why don't we just start sharing recommendations and our thoughts on, and our experiences on how to make these things really work versus just talking about the technologies or poo-pooing on some prevailing misconceptions, which is, it's important, but I mean, we have like you, Rob, and we have you, Rick, real true pioneers of digital twin. Who better to ask the question of how to make this crap work than you guys?
Oh, it has to work?
Rule number one. It has to work.
Come on, Rob. It compiled.
It compiled.
I'm sure we'll have different opinions too, right? I mean, that's
sure.
They come out from different worlds.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then the rest of us will just ask stupid questions.
Yep.
Critique.
Yeah.
Smart questions for me.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, Stephanie, smart question. I'll ask all the dumb questions.
Yeah. Because I know we've certainly talked about the technology of digital twins before on this.
Yeah, we had another one like maybe 20 episodes back.
40 or 50 or 60 episodes ago, I know we talked about it.
Well, we're influencers because there's another global event that chose the digital twin topic for today, and I think we influenced it.
Really?
And,
yes. No doubt.
I think that's Rick's favorite new consortium, actually.
Oh, easy.
Don't get the man started.
Oh my God.
Pay to play. You can see which finger I have up.
So where do you start with this stuff, guys? Where do you start with digital twin?
Apollo 13, before the new kid, before the junior consultant comes and tells you all about it, right? It's not brand new, right? There's been digital twin technologies for some time. I think Apollo 13 was probably one of the widest known examples, but might not always be referred as a digital twin. But when they called in, Houston, we had a problem. What a great way to troubleshoot from planet Earth with all the simulators, right? So, that will, it's and now we get to hear from Rob and Rick as to how things have evolved. But I don't know. That's I go back. That's the first example that I think of digital.
You just stole Rob's thunder, dude.
So basically, the takeaway.
Let's restart the recording. I'll shut up.
Let's give credit to Gary Sinise specifically.
Oh yeah.
For working on the physical twin of the spacecraft in Houston to make it work.
Work the problem, team.
Exactly. I need this square peg to go into this round hole. We need to get CO2 out.
What an awesome moment in engineering. Like, if you're an engineer, here's duct tape, like a piece of hose, and you need to make a life support system out of it. Have at it.
That's awesome. Pretty amazing. It's so amazing.
You were channeling Stevie Ray and Jimmy. I'll channel Jesse Jackson a little bit here.
Okay.
Evolution. So digital twins started from simulation through operation and now optimization. So that's where we got to go. So let's talk about that kind of like, it started off with really, and David hit on it, a simulation capability, physics-based typically, right, initially. I just riffing, there was this company I came across the other day. I apologize to the company. I'm kind of zoning on their name, but they what they were doing was blending physics models and machine learning in a very clever way. So you're kind of like, you're not trying to just throw machine learning at kind of figuring out how something behaves. You start with some a priori knowledge and then refine it. Anyway, so, that end of the spectrum, you got all kinds of people doing cool stuff, right? From the product design side of it, being able to interact with the product almost in a way before you've even built anything. The ANSYSs of the world, the PLM vendors of the world, the CAD vendors doing some just super cool stuff there. Then, a lot of companies then took that to kind of operating it or taking that simulation one step further. And we might have talked about this on a previous one about pavilion technologies pretty early on. But basically what they did is they said, all right, we're going to create this model of a chemical process and a smokestack, a digital twin of it. And we're going to have a real IoT sensor that measures the emissions. And then we're going to use a mathematical model to try and predict what it would have been. Well, that digital twin became so accurate that they were able to pull out these very, very expensive catalytic sensors and satisfy EPA reporting requirements. So it moved, it's almost like Uber simulation, but you're feeding the simulation with the real world, right? And then, kind of like what Rob's been doing at Moab and a lot of the companies have been doing with their IoT platforms, kind of a digital twin as the API for the physical world, right? That's how you get at the data and the stuff. And then people now it's like the optimization side is kind of the I'm not going to say it's the final frontier, it's the newest frontier.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, so, I mean, a lot of what I've kind of read, I'm more of a reader around digital twin technology. I'm not much of a hands-on at all.
Not a writer?
I'm not a writer right now on this one either. But it is a lot of it, because I know that a lot of stuff is going on with the DoD, but was a lot of it initially cause and effect? If I do this, what happens down the chain? Or you talked about now it's more around optimization, but are we still using digital twin technology for if I do XYZ, what happens next? Or will this impact the operations?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you talk about like in terms of using it for simulations, for instance, the good example is we would put an aircraft wing or a car in a wind tunnel to measure aerodynamics and stuff like that. And that's a physical way of doing that. And with digital twins, there's the twin, the model of the car, let's just say, but a whole lot of other stuff than just the sensors when you think about operational twins at runtime. And so you've got all these rules about how the car is supposed to behave when it's impacted by wind or certain things like that. A bunch of, I'd say, multivariate system. And there's so much stuff coming at it. And so the takeaway, though, is you want your digital thing. I should be able to fire fake data at my twin through my APIs or whatever. And it should behave like the car or the aircraft wing behaves inside that wind tunnel. So that you can, because ultimately, we're trying to figure out bad stuff and good stuff before we do the real thing. Like my first experience with anything that remotely was like a digital twin was, since I've spent most of my career up here in the Seattle area, I remember doing consulting at Boeing back in the 90s, and I remember the first time that Boeing started using the CATIA software from Dassault Systems, and I think of Dassault as ultimately one of the leaders in all that whole world. And the first time how we design an aircraft digitally, which was a big thing for them at the time, because probably like everything else, they designed it physically, when you're doing things physically, it's a lot of trial and error, and it's expensive, right? You're building things that are real and it doesn't work out and you got to change it again. It's just like when you see someone designing a new car and they use clay or something like that to design what it's going to look like. It's a heck of a lot cheaper to iterate digitally and fire fake data at it and things like that to see how it behaves, and keep modifying it digitally before you have to actually start bending sheet metal and building real stuff, right?
Yeah, but let me ask you guys this, because, everyone talks about how you can use a digital twin or how you should use a digital twin. But I guess the real fundamental question, because digital twins, even though they're not new, they are kind of new. How do you get started with this stuff? Is there a continuum or some sort of maturity curve that you ride up to get to this point of being able to optimize things like what Rick said? Or where do you start? Because I think the question in a lot of people's minds is, well, how do you get started with this stuff? And then how do I not screw it up? Right? Because once you get started, the last thing you want to do is recognize that you screwed up along the way, and now your digital twin is a crap digital twin, and it can't do the optimization or all the other fancy stuff that you guys are. So maybe you guys can talk about what that path looks like, or that journey looks like, and then what are some of the big pitfalls that you have to watch out for?
One of the big challenges first of all, its classic answer is it depends, right? What you're trying to accomplish, because digital twins can play, as Rob described, a pivotal role early on in product and process design, right? That's if that's your objective, they're very that tends to be more towards the physics-based models. Actually, a very cool intersection early on. They're very familiar with generative design. It's a real neat concept now where you take those physics-based models and the simulation and iterate it with AI and actually let algorithms tweak the design of the product to achieve your outcome. I want a chair that weighs less than 3 pounds, that can hold 350 pounds, that I can make for under $9. That's what you tell the algorithm, and it makes it. Anyway, but so if, simulation, a natural offshoot that early on digital twins got used for was training, right? Now you have this perfectly good simulation model that represents a product, a process, a set of assets. And as Rob said, what happens if you start feeding it like simulated data or real data? People can interact with some visual representation of that model to train themselves on how to operate it without blowing up the nuclear plant in advance. In the industrial world, a lot of times we would start with the twin first got created, not in the product design side of it, but when that equipment hit the floor, right? You took a SCADA system or an HMI system and you hooked it up to all the sensors and controllers, and you had that pretty picture of it. Your virtual buttons and all that kind of stuff. So for those folks, the genesis of the digital twin was really for operation, right? You started collecting data and things like that. I think as it evolves, it almost enriches as it moves down that cycle, right? If you're starting upstream, you can start with the physical attributes of what this thing is, right? And then it kind of adds, capability and behaviors as you kind of go into operation. You can now acquire real data that can feed back into design. You can use it to visualize. You can use it to collect data. But the reason it gets enriched is that the moment you go into kind of operations of that asset, you need way more data than what just came from the design system, right? It's coming from all kinds of systems. And I'm sure we'll spend some time on this, but the idea of some people's view of a digital twin is more really what should be called a device twin, right? It's a mirror image of a physical device. I kind of take a more holistic view that a digital twin is kind of everything about that asset, right? It's whole data and capabilities and all. And we used that term in the previous episode. It's capabilities, right? And that tends to be kind of an aggregate from lots of different streams and systems and so on. So it kind of gets enriched as you move down the line. increasingly, you see people trying to use like VR or AR or all kinds of cool visual ways to interact with that. It becomes very, very difficult and expensive to do if you're not tied back to the kind of the design and drawing side, because recreating that 3D kind of world is like a ridiculous amount of work if you have to do it from scratch. So I think increasingly the folks, not just the CAD folks, right, but the people who are doing process design, one of the holy grails of digital twin, this has been around for like 25 years, the goal was you put on your VR goggles and you're going to design a chemical plant or a brewery, and you pull virtual tanks, right, and virtual mixing vessels, and all of the capabilities of those and the control logic and everything just kind of comes along with it. You Lego block them together. There's actually a company called Simio in Pittsburgh that does this for a lot of different kinds of processes and equipment. But you kind of pull it all together. You kind of change the size of things, and you can basically run through that whole exercise. In a perfect world, why couldn't that then become kind of the blueprint to build it, the control logic to operate it, the environment to train people on it, and so on. And that's happening a little bit, but again, it's kind of that where you want to use it in the life cycle, and do you build upon the kind of physics-based, design-based models, or are you recreating them kind of at that IoT or industrial IoT level?
Yeah, and when Rick said optimization, that's where you start, Leonard, right? So if to answer the question of like, what should I do first in digital twin? The answer is like, well, okay, what do I want to optimize? That's where I would start, because, luckily, if you know, what do I need to optimize, whether this is process and someone's going to try to sell you RPA down the road, but, we have to think of physical process or machine process. And I think digital twins is one of those things that it's almost criminal if you're a responsible enterprise and you're not looking at a way of leveraging this virtual instance of the real world for you to figure out quickly, how do I optimize something the quickest? So anyway, that's how I would answer.
I think, well, okay, my thought is that optimize is probably the last thing that you can do. Going back to the idea of maturity, you need to have some base capabilities, or at least that's kind of what I'm trying to hear from you guys, unless we're assuming that all these quote unquote digital twins of things come prepackaged, like a Docile or a PTC has a library of quote unquote digital twins of, let's say, standard parts and stuff. But what about the brownfield stuff, the stuff that hasn't been modeled out, that you have to figure out, how do I, let's say for an oil refinery, how the hell do I go out and create a high fidelity digital twin out of this thing? What are the steps that they should take? Should they approach that asset as a monolith, or do you break it down? I mean, how the hell do you do this stuff? Because you might have some newer stuff that's well profiled as a digital twin coming into your overall simulation environment. But you're going to have a crap load of old stuff that no one knows about. So, I mean, how do you know what I'm saying? What's that starting point? Because I think, seriously, I've been on so many friggin' digital twin webinars and conversations, and no one talks about those first steps. So I really want to give you guys an opportunity to speak to that.
Could you give me an opportunity, please?
Yes. I'm going to shut up.
So, and actually, it's kind of fresh in my mind. So I recorded a session for the IoT Grand Slam, and it's kind of history of IoT, at least my history, doing stuff in the 90s, actually. And it kind of brought it home for me. So perfect example, that startup was looking to work with vending machines, which is that cliche deal when they're on IoT. And we were trying to make route drivers more efficient. They're only going to, you want the machine to tell you its inventory, right? How much money it's making, that kind of stuff. But it's the classic example. It's not as complex, obviously, as a chemical plant, but it's an old machine and there's nothing intelligent about it at all. So where do you start? And so in the session, I kind of talked about, And I often talk about digital twin models or an asset class or something like that you inherit from. So what we did, and whenever I talk about digital twins, I always use a car as an example because it's something everyone can understand. And I always say, pull out the owner's manual out of your glove compartment. That's where your digital twin begins. It's inside that thing for a consumer. Well, in the same vein, with these vending machines, we grabbed the schematics for all the models of all the vending machines made by all the major vending manufacturers, because we had to retrofit everything. We were burning EEPROMs and having our embedded C code on there and building a black box, and we had to use cables to wire into the spirals that move that make your candy bar fall out to know that inventory happened. I mean, that is OG, but it's also a good. It's also a message to people today about brownfield, and it's all about retrofitting, and you just have to do that ugly stuff. Yeah. But the digital twin model was that schematic for that class of vending machine, and then we use that to tell us this is how the thing behaves, this is how you interface with it, these are the properties of that vending machine. This is how you're going to connect to the coin box to know that someone put in a new quarter and it just made some more money. This is how you interface with another sensor that turned out to be really important called exact change light. Because why does that matter? If the exact change light comes on, you're not going to make as much money. And it's all about money, right? And so that was a great beginning for us, was using those schematics. And so with a car, when I think of just operational digital twins, the kind of the mundane, but probably what's used the most, or by people these days, nothing too sexy. It's not about simulations. It's just that operational at runtime. Because I'm trying to, as David said, I'm trying to gain efficiencies. And I don't want to be criminal. Go ahead.
I was saying, when we had our platform discussion, it fits in, it dovetails perfectly in with the abstraction and API concepts, right? So that twin becomes that abstraction, and the API is the consumption layer. But to your point, who cares what you had 10 different vendors of vending machines, but to some extent, you were able to say, here's how I find inventory, here's how I check its operational status, the temperature of the cooler, whatever all that stuff might be. And that was an abstraction as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But as we talked about, and I don't want to geek out too much, we talked about just kind of the operational digital twins last time, but it's a lot of times, like in real life, how does people work with it today? A lot of people start off and say, and almost, like you talked about the device twins, a lot of times it does kind of start there, that mirror image. What are the attributes, the properties of this device, the sensors, the name of those sensors, the data type, the unit of measure, so that you know what to expect. Without getting too geeky about things like early binding, late binding, why the difference.
Yeah, man, go with it.
Okay, all right. So when I think about like strongly typed and loosely typed datas and stuff like that, that kind of hits home. So when people, oftentimes, right or wrong, associate digital twins with IoT platforms. If for no other reason, IoT is just plumbing to feed data, right? That's all it is. And the twin is the thing, right? And so however I get the data. But with IoT, you're not building a bunch of REST or, God forbid, SOAP APIs that have strongly typed data types that says this is the data that's coming at it and it's going to look exactly like this every time. Because if I did, I'd have to be building a million different REST APIs to accomplish that. So the way they work is they have an API or they use MQTT or whatever, and they don't know what the data looks like, actually. The data is a payload and it's kind of obscure. And the only way you know about it is after the fact, after it arrives in your platform or whatever you've got. And this is just basic database lookup stuff, 101. I go, oh, this came from device number 25. I'm going to do a lookup. Oh, device 25 is of asset class or digital twin model type 75, which means it's a Mercedes ML350. And the year model is 2016, and this is how they all are going to look. And then through that lookup, I then can walk a tree in that database, for instance, that says, here are all the properties of that data. You don't know anything about that data. It just arrived. Let's just say it's a JSON structure that comes flying into your system. You need to know, because your analytics need to know what to expect. And so that metadata that you've created, that tree you're walking says, oh yes, left front tire pressure is one of the properties, and its unit of measure is PSI. And basically what you're doing is you're matching that and going, and with the labeled data that came in, you go, oh, and the value of that is 35. And then to Rick's point, you need to go further, put more logic, put more KPIs, put more things as part of that twin. Don't just have it be a mirror image. And so the next baby step is you say, well, my expected good value for that is 32, let's say, or 35. And then you could just do simple red, yellow, green KPIs as your next baby step. Because a lot of this, the first step is always like pattern matching. You know, I know what it is. Here's the value I got. I have software. So obviously, you have to have software, an agent, a bot that brings it to life. Software is what brings things to life. So I have to look and go, here's what I got. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it should be. Do I fire an alarm? Am I in the red zone? Did the value come in and it says it's 9 PSI? Oh, I need to do something about it. Well, what do I need to do about it? Do I pass it on to some other analytics? And then you can have other things you can build into the twin that says, hey, if it's this, here's a possible prescripted. I also like to talk about all this stuff as if it was your doctor, your physician. You know, you come in and the doctor is trying to figure out what's wrong with you. And so the doctor has a tree that the doctor goes through, right? Based on going to med school. And they go through a tree and they go, well, you got a high temperature and you've got this, and maybe you've got the flu, or maybe you've got COVID, but it's always kind of a guess. And then you always hear people, not as much, but prescriptive analytics type stuff where I say, well, based on this, this, and this, I think I need to give you this pill or this shot, that kind of thing. And that's how you get prescriptive. You could bake all that into a fully featured twin, which I don't know if a lot of people are doing that. Everybody, it's all over the gamut. Lots of people are just...
Some are.
Most people I see are, when they talk digital twin, it's basically just a data schema. Yeah. And that's fine. You got to start somewhere. Yeah. But adding that prescriptive stuff to say, hey, if you see this, this, and this, maybe you need to go tighten the bolt on this machine or whatever it is. And that's kind of where people are trying to get to.
So Rob, you're essentially saying to get started, you can start small. You know, you have your replica. There are some individual variables that you can set some parameters on and learn from or act on. But where it gets even more, I guess, advanced is when we start to look at multiple variables and patterns and anomalies of quite a few variables. And that, I mean, so you're saying we can start small because you asked, Leonard, you asked the question, how do people get started? And you're saying, hey, we can start small and you can add some very basic questions to your data schematics and answer some of those questions and act on those. But where are we at? Are we like, I would love to hear about, is it advancing? Is it really advancing, or is it pretty basic out there?
Oh, to your point of where, and it kind of ties in, the first step is visualization, right? Humans are still pretty good algorithms and actuators. We're not bad. Now we're trying to, in a number of industries, you're trying to change that and take humans more out of the loop, but we're pretty good at those kinds of things. So take the digital twin for the car or the filling machine or whatever, that becomes the foundation for visualization. And to build on kind of what Rob was saying, the next step is you decorate it not just with telemetry from the car, but like its maintenance history. Here's the parts that have been done. Here's when the last oil change was, and so it becomes sort of a multi-stream kind of view as that layer cake grows, right? And that's when you can again start with visualization. Now make that data. Again, I agree with Rob. The first phase that a lot of people focus on is it's a data aggregation point, or data consumption point. And you can do simple analytics. You don't have to start with machine learning and AI. Hey, look at this. Every time, every 30,000 miles, every vehicle that was sourced with this thermostat failed. Oh, well, that's great insight. Didn't require rocket science and machine learning and AI. It was just someone had access to that data and could now, do some stuff. And then when you start to proceduralize or operationalize some of that intelligence, it's at some point, some of that makes it back into the vehicle. Look at all the idiot lights you have on your car, right? How does it know that your fuel filler door might be, your fuel cap might be off? It's a pattern that it learned. If you start to see these types of vacuum behaviors and sensor readings. So all that stuff kind of, it's just, again, a layer cake. Start with data aggregation, visualization. The next logical step now is, you can start to bring it into actionability, whether that actionability is changing the device or real time, closed loop stuff, or if it's just triggering people or other business processes, cool. But you're now actually doing something with that. You apply business rules. Again, I think the layer cake Rob painted was perfect.
Rick, Rob, how important is, when Leonard traumatizes me with all his questions sometimes.
We're all traumatized.
But, I think what Leonard said, so let's just.
Amazing, your stupid questions.
Well, that's my job, and I feel like you're taking that away from me, man. Come on.
Hey, trust me, man. I got game in the stupid front.
Controversial.
Well, obviously sticking to the digital twins, but if we think of scenarios where, let's just say, I think, Leonard, you said oil and gas. I might have 300 well pads, I don't know, all over the world, where the machinery is identical. So let's just say that the variables here is the soil, which you can't control for that. But if I know my operations and I know that I have 2 pieces of equipment in the same area, but one is producing better than the other, that's another view of, like, from a business perspective, some of the things we hear is like, how do I optimize for that? If I'm in the thermoplastics business and I've got this machine and the waste is less than at this other plant, how do I optimize for that? So I want to turn this into a question is, does it help when the stakeholder has a really good idea of what good and optimized is before going into a digital twin project, or is it the other way around? Because we all have an idea of, like, that machine's running really, really well. My OEE, I know Rick hates OEE, but some people still measure. I know. So anyway, is that a good start to have an idea of what good is, so that I can leverage digital twin to replicate good across factories, across SCADA sites, across whatever?
Well, you start with good from your owner's manual.
Right, exactly.
Your past experience, right? That's what you're hoping.
Right.
You talk about 2 of the same types of machines, and one's doing well and one's the other. And the other thing, and I'll probably get in trouble here. I remember there was a lot of futuristic stuff that was going to happen with future versions of Lumada at Hitachi that never saw the light of day. Just crazy stuff. And I was just in my zone there. But a lot of it was, how there's the asset class, the model. Let's just say it's the Mercedes ML350. And then the instances, all that fleet of instances of twins that are all gathering data. As Rick talked about it, that whole long, what does that look like? Oh, it looks like a thread over time. And some of it's coming from real-time telemetry, and some of it is, to his point, it's manually entered. I changed the oil at this stuff and I put in information, or I did service. And so you might have a human manually enter into that long digital thread that grows over time. But another important part of it is to have, and of course, privacy and stuff plays into this. But ideally, those instances of twins would bubble up their information or anomalous information to kind of the asset class, that model that kind of knows across the fleet, hey, this one's having problems. Or as Rick said, at 30,000 miles, I'm having some temperature sensor problem happening. And if that model of that thing could see across a fleet of 10,000 of these things and start putting those dots together, that's super helpful. Like that would lead to a car recall, for instance, or a whatever. Or how does your machines all behave? Also, I just want to say I have an epiphany here. I think we should start our own digital twin consortium. We'll have to call it something else, but
I have an idea. The Digital Twin Consortium.
That's why I brought Ronnie out here. Break
Yes.
down that wall, Digital Twin Consortium.
Hey, it's Thread Mafia.
Yeah. Well, because I see, and again, nothing, I'm friends with a lot of people who have joined that consortium, but I'd say a lot of them are really new to the party. Let me just say that. And they're, some of them know what they're talking about, but most of them are just brand new to the party and they're just going down some crazy paths. Also, so bubbling up to know what your fleet of twins, your 10,000 instances of ML350s, so that you can see bigger patterns across fleets, not just the one machine, right? I was trying to, I don't have a pen, but I was going to draw like circles, like on this, there's the twin, this one circle here. And then inside the circle, there are subsystems that might have a parent-child relationship with the bigger twin. And I know we've talked about this before. I have industrial robots here, and they're all twins, but they all work together on an assembly line. But the assembly line should not just be a group. It should be a twin unto itself, and it has its own properties. And so all these industrial robots belong to this twin called assembly line. And the assembly line has all these properties, and there's one-to-one mappings between properties that a robot has and the overall assembly line that talks about the health. You want the whole thing to be an organism, like a living thing. And then the twins of your assembly line, there's a bunch of those assembly lines, and they're part of something that looks like a group, but it's called a factory, and the whole factory is a twin. And how all the data flows and how they all operate together creates this giant organism. When I was designing future versions of Lumada, I had weird circles that were, almost looked like Venn diagrams, concentric circles that were, and a lot of this was driven by, how there's other megatrends going on now, like Industry 4.0, where in these factories will not be able to have this static assembly line anymore because they're going to be agile and they're going to be super customized cars and things. And so they're going to have stations. And there's the notion that, well, I can use Ethernet on an assembly line because I only have to change it when I retool, and that's with the new car model. Yeah. What if you're retooling every week? Yeah. And so not only does it change, like you're having to use wireless instead of Ethernet maybe, but also the notion that your twin group looking things will change maybe every week. And so you need to have this flexibility where the twins of these robots belong to this group this week, but maybe next week, two of them are over here belonging to this one and stuff like that. And I spent a lot of time trying to, this idea of composite twins to bubble up and have them be able to change and be agile. Because going back to the history of digital twins, what is it? Dr. Greaves, I'm going to say it wrong. Is he at Michigan, University of Michigan? Anyway, he was also kind of credited with getting the digital twin thing going. I think he called it a variation of doppelganger. Anyway, but he also said one thing, that he said Industry 4.0 will not happen without digital twins. Like they're one-to-one. And so anyway, part of this Moab stuff, and I'm totally going to trigger Rick because he always wants the code.
Break down that wall, Mr.
Yeah. I'm such a geek. I'm like updating it to .NET 5 because it's now 60% faster than .NET Core 3.1, and it's faster than Go. And I'm so weird about efficiency and speed. But one thing that's been fun for me is Moab gives me something to do too. It's also a hobby. It's not just this other big thing that we're trying to do, but it's also, I write these crazy articles about digital twins doing ridiculous stuff. I use Moab as a bullshit meter. I will go write code to see if it will really work. And so when I'm writing some bullshit article about how twins can be process twins and work together as peers and not just parent and child, part of me is like, gosh, should I write this? And someone's going to throw the BS flag on me. And so I'll sit there at my keyboard and see if I can make it work in code.
Love it.
And you know what? It's fun for me at nights and weekends.
It helps to find the art of the possible too.
Steak, wine, and code. That's Rob.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, I want to ask a stupid question by circling back to.
Can I pop in one thing real quick?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Just to rip on Rob's thing about epiphanies and twin models. One light bulb that went on for me really early was that we have, for a variety of reasons, have tried to model the world in hierarchies over the years. And things aren't, the world isn't hierarchical. It's a graph. It's a connected, complex network. So in terms of best practices, one thing I would encourage people that are looking to build out new digital twin models and the relationships between, think in graphs. The team at Microsoft that did Azure Digital Twins recently kind of rethought it from scratch. And now that graphiness, if you think about the nodes in a pumping, water distribution network, or just hell, that flexible factory that Rob defined, that's a nodal relationship. And so just technical geek out thing, but design around a graph data model.
Yeah. Okay. So the stupid question I was going to ask is circling back to what you said earlier, Rick, about, this layering things on top of your starting point with the digital twin. It sounds like there's a number of dependencies that you need to be mindful of as you actually implement a digital twin. And, noting that you're going to be constantly layering things on, ultimately getting to this mature, hydrated digital twin, right? What are some of the key dependencies that you and Rob have observed, or maybe, even David, that you guys have observed that people tend to screw up? And what are some of the things that they should be mindful of? And think in terms of dependencies, because obviously if you're going to make use of these digital twins and build applications on top of them, you have to have other things going on other than just the digital twin itself, right?
Honestly, it's a classic governance problem in a way. Actually, maybe spin on it, master data management problem. I don't know if you ever heard that term in enterprise apps, right?
You used to do it a lot.
Right. So I have customer identity over here, and there, an asset identity over here. So if you think about it, let's use a smart building, right? You've got the as designed. As built was probably different. They made some design changes that may or may not have gotten back into the designs and blueprints. And then as you operate it, you change parts out, you upgrade the HVACs. So you've got all these systems and stuff that feeds into that collective model. Are you really keeping it up to date, right? Is it an accurate representation? So in many ways, it's not that different than any kind of composite application problem, right? Where you have a governance and integrity problem, but perfect's the enemy of good. So you might never be able to achieve that. To that extent, I do think, again, kind of a design philosophy. If you're building a digital twin platform or an IoT platform, I encourage you to not only create APIs to get at the twins and their data, but actually to model and create them and keep them up to date. So let integrators and smart folks automate that process, right? Oh, something changed over here in this system. I can automatically update my digital twins model, to reflect that. So, anticipating that change and having systems that let you kind of automate as much of that as possible, I think helps.
What about on the sensor front? I mean, if you don't have sensors and you don't have an infrastructure or architecture that can basically, create a contextual view of the environment, the physical environment, I mean, isn't there a dependency there?
That's common, man. I would say most cases you don't have that digital twin model. Think of a plant with a data historian, OSI historian or a Wonderware or Emerson historian. You've got 10,000 tag names. Occasionally they're organized into some type of model, and they have products that let you do that. But more often than not, it's you've got to do that mapping at the next level.
Yeah, and that's. Sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to use a different example because I encountered that with Lumada, the idea of what if you don't have sensors? I'll give you a good example of that, where we need to work in the world as it is, and it's a hybrid world. There's the world that we want it to be with sensors and telemetry, and there's most of the world that actually doesn't have any of that still. And so a great example is, and you'll love this, Mr. Verizon, but smart meters on the house, right? Sitting back to how much electricity I'm using. We talk about smart meters and using a variety of connectivity things that we've done over the decades to get that telemetry about how much energy you're using at your house. But the reality is most of the world has some guy jump over your fence into your backyard and he still reads the meter. That's actually most of the world today, but it's not even close actually. And so one of the things that I was dealing with Lumada was the notion of, well, there's the twin. I know this is might sometimes seem overkill. Let's just say I've got the twin for this meter for this house because I need to build this person. And it's really simple. It's not a big deal. But there's the notion of, well, some meters are smart and send telemetry over wireless and they populate that twin, the latest version, and then historical over time. But then there's most of them where it's some guy who is doing a meter reading on a clipboard, or he might have a smartphone. Maybe he's got his cool Intermec or Zebra or whatever. I don't know who's making that stuff today, or a tablet. And so I was always I worked on this thing. It's really simple. It's called on behalf of. And so there are smart meters where it says meter 25 is sending telemetry to digital twin for meter 25. But sometimes it'll be employee 9000 who captures the data for for meter 25, and that person submits it on behalf of meter 25. The data will still arrive at its final destination, the twin for that, as if it was smart, but it's not. And it's important for us to realize that there's a manual world still all around us. And so that was just and so having that twin as a starting point, as a repository, but knowing that there could be multiple pathways to get the data is interesting.
I'll come into the middle because, Rick was talking about tags, and coming into an industrial legacy environment, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, and, but there's really good tools to optimize them. And then your bill on behalf, it's context, is metadata. How do the humans, so in this case, the meter reader, which Rick pointed with a firearm because he doesn't want this guy on his property, because I didn't know it was the meter reader. Oops.
Stephanie can do that. I don't know about you, Rick. You live in PA, right?
We're Pennsylvania, man. Trust me.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
So the reality is that, part of the digital twin, in some environments, you have to consider the metadata that's created by the humans walking about. If we go back to Rob's modular factory, well, okay, great. We're retooling every week. Well, who's doing the retooling? And if it's humans, how do you take that in consideration of that twin? And I know, Rick's hot on all things metadata because it's necessary for the success of them.
One thing I saw the other day was kind of cool is, and you just tweet this, is like, if there's still a lot of processes, as you both point out, the humans are doing stuff and recording data. I saw a very cool application of vision technology to eliminate data entry. So when a piece of work moves or leaves the station, without even having to do like barcoding and all that kind of stuff, or when certain tasks get performed, it can literally figure out that you've completed that task and just record it. It's really clever.
That is clever.
The other one that Leonard, I think you were asking about, like, you have all this, semi-structured. How do you structure stuff? And there is a new breed of company that's starting to pop up to try and wrangle this at the edge, so that the higher level systems can connect to a more intelligent system. So you got the Kepwares, HiBytes, Omnio, a whole bunch of people that are building a way to try and contextualize so that basically, the perfect scenario is where you ask something what its twin model is, right? What are you, right? I am a ML350. Oh, there, that tells me almost there. And here's my static stuff about me. Here's my VIN number. Here's my, whatever, my own. That's the perfect world. And then increasingly, where we don't have that, particularly in brownfield, now there's a class of companies that are kind of edge focused that are popping that context in a little closer to the equipment. As opposed to having to do it all the way up at the top.
Yeah, like my impression based on what you guys have been saying is this crap is hard. And the other thing that I'm starting to realize is that I think a lot of end users or enterprises need to think about solution design, not system design, solution design, but be very, very mindful of system readiness, and whether that's having enough sensors out in the field to profile and contextually, contextually profile your environments and the assets that you're trying to create a digital twin around. I mean, those things have to be factored in as you start to build your IoT solution. I mean, that's what I'm taking away from you guys in a nutshell.
I would beg to differ on the hard. And I just think it's not magic, right? It doesn't just magic.
It's not magic, but I think a lot of environments, to Rob's points, are going to have these gaps that need to be dealt with very early on, and you might have proxy stuff just simply based on the data that you have, the degree of telemetry that you actually can receive from different assets that need to be part of the solution, right? So that's why I'm bringing that solution layer into the conversation. It can't just all be about system, and there's this whole readiness paradigm that people need to be mindful of as they approach that. And maybe that's one of the reasons why these things fail all the time, because everyone kind of makes it look easy.
Well, I just want to step back. People were building fairly complex models in days and weeks. I guess that's when we say hard, it means it requires knowledge of best practices. It requires good tools. It requires a multidisciplinary team, right? Typically, that is familiar with the data sources. So yes, it's executing the project is not easy, but the actual tasks themselves are not rocket science.
Leonard, the reality is that today, and to Rick's point, and I'm not saying that it's hard or it's easy, but the reality is that you have domain experts who, if you want to discuss digital twin for a distributor control system for the catalyst industry versus oil and gas versus thermoplastics, like they have these models and this domain knowledge that they have refined over the years. And it's not that it's going to be the perfect black box, but that once deployed, you should see benefits almost immediately, if not only by visualization. So it's anyway. Again, coming into the middle of what you guys are saying there.
But hey, David, I'm gonna point to something you said earlier when you were citing oil and gas and the oil field and the platforms. The funny thing is the industry doesn't care about the assets. You mentioned the soil, right? They actually want to know what's under the soil. They want to know the asset, which is the reservoir. You have a well. You want to make sure that the rig is gonna continue to produce. But the more important thing is, especially when you start to look at some of these older fields that are starting to reach their end of life, you want to know where the oil is, and so they want to really understand what's underneath the ground. So think about that, and that's the solution. That's the solution for them, is how do I get to 1% more out of that asset? And they could care less about whether or not the well and the equipment that's operating on the well is has 100% uptime. What's money for these guys is getting that extra 1% out of that reservoir.
Yeah, but you have to communicate the value proposition that if this well goes down, that downtime causes X amount of money not to produce that day. That's what money talks, and then say, okay, now I will justify this digital twin investment to showcase how we can get that uptime, so you can make your money and be optimized for that production.
Right, but that ends up being much smaller money than that 1% extra that you can pump.
Well, unless you grab Rob's imaginary circles where everything is tied in, because no one brings the drilling equipment until after all of the soil sampling and research has been completed. That hey, there's viability in this geography before the machinery comes in. So it's like a digital twin back to another digital twin, and and latency matters. We didn't talk about that, but latency matters in digital twins.
Hey, So I guess we're either going to pressure this consortium to open up a little bit, or are we going to do our own thing? We'll discuss on a future.
Yeah.
And viewers, give us your feedback.
Yeah, definitely. You want to take here? I have a suggestion for a future digital twin topic: is taking discussion from a vendor's view. Because we talked about end user view, maybe looking at it from a vendor's view.
Well, you were talking about just best practices, dependencies, pitfalls. The reason there's consortiums is they're trying to get everybody on the same page. A big problem. Everybody's using their own way of doing digital twins, and they're all different from each other, and that's a kind of a problem, right? I probably said before, when we were doing the asset avatars at Bullotta, I probably like Rick used to do, I had to spend a bunch of time in Waldorf working with the SAP team on Leonardo to get our twins to talk to each other, because guess what? They were different. SAP acquired some twin technology from a Norwegian company, and they were baking it into Leonardo, and then we had ours. And so we're building like we do in software all the time, mapping layers, translation layers, my twin to your twin, whatever. Well, that's the world you live in, until there's a standard or people get on the same page. You just hope that the standard's a good standard.
Yeah, with internet for IoT, man.
My old business partner, Russ, had a great line. He said, every atom of the sun's energy will be burned out before we have a universal IoT standard.
That's true. It's true. He's right. He's right.
And if you want a best practice when you're looking at this, open source. It has to be open source, because the digital twin.
You're right.
And avoid the vendor lock-in. You already have the assets that you're trying to sweat. So my digital twin needs to be open, so I can talk to all these things that are closed from vendors that I continue to refrain from naming.
So I'm gonna make a promise here. Woo! Before the end of the year, so I got this month of December, I will have migrated to this newer, faster, more efficient platform. If it's Moab's this open source thing for a purpose, but it's also this kind of test bed that we can use to play with and build on, and we can use it to describe in very Forrest Gump-like terms how this stuff works, and we can make it real, and we can use it as a demonstration platform. And at some point, yes, Rick will say, Rob, what the hell were you doing? You're trying to do digital twins with Postgres?
I'm ready to sling code, brother. I'm ready to go.
It's fun, but it's also a great way, because it's good to it's fun to teach people, and making it real, and so anyway, that's my commitment, is to get that stuff out there by the end of the year with this new platform, and everybody can goof around with it.
Any help, let me know.
Yeah, why don't you take us out, Rob?
I don't know how to take us out. Like us. Watch our dance videos on TikTok. Go to iotcoffeetalk.com, .org, .net, and it kind of will redirect you to the YouTubes. And because we're all YouTubers here, we're not really podcasters, we're YouTubers. And come check us out, like us, hit the bell, and keep coming back. You know what? Because what's the takeaway? We've been consistent. We've been here every week.
Yeah.
When did we start? In the summer? Last summer?
Yeah.
Spring, whatever.
You and Leonard have perfect attendance, don't you?
Yeah. Well,
Leonard has had perfect attendance. Yes, Leonard's been here every time. But consistency is key, and hopefully we're teaching you guys stuff to help make things understandable for you.
Hey, look, you know what? I learn from you guys, so it's totally worth it just to get on the horn with you guys every week. It's like fantastic stuff. Look at that.
What did you write there?
I saw a note from a guy who works on Node-RED, and he's doing something cool now. He's Twitch streaming his work. So if you're part of that project and you kind of want to see how he thinks, and maybe we'll do some of that.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. That's a great idea.
Ideas. Okay. Hey, guys. Great episode.
Yeah.
It was fun. Learned a lot. Thank you all so much. See you guys next week.
Bye.
Take care.